Carole Murko, class of 1983, is a culinary artist who learned how to cook by observing her mother and grandmother. Carole has emulated their passion for entertaining, cooking, and feeding friends and family. She has translated it into her own way of honoring traditions by creating Heirloom Meals, a storytelling platform to share treasured family recipes, stories, and tips. At Smith, Carole majored in economics and minored in art history. She also holds an MA in international economics from NYU and holds the Chartered Financial Analyst CFA designation. Prior to founding Heirloom Meals, Carole had successful careers on Wall Street and in interior design and decoration. And Carole is a true testament to the power of a liberal arts education. We are so delighted to have her join us today. So I'm going to turn it over to Carole.
So thanks. You did a great job sharing my background. I'll take a page out of Jill Conway's, like her true north. My true north is food, family, and cooking. We want to dive in. And the first thing I really want to talk about is like, why do I care so much about family recipes and stories? One thing is we can get recipes anywhere these days, right? Just absolutely anywhere. You decide you want to cook guy pan, whatever, you look it up and you get hundreds of recipes. You pick one with the most stars and you make it and it's lovely. But our recipes, our family recipes, have emotional context that makes them special, right? And what you don't know about me is that I grew up in a 3-generational household with my Italian-American grandparents. My father was actually born in Italy, and my parents, of course. And everything about our lives was centered around food. And my grandmother, the funniest thing I actually had to tell you that what I remember about her is she used to get hot. I guess maybe it was menopause, but she would like stand, be in the kitchen. Like she would take her shirt off and she would be like cooking in her bra and high-heeled shoes, right? It was like such a sight, but it was like so amazing. But I would just sidle next to her and I just learned how to cook. It's like I never took a cooking. I did take some cooking classes as an adult, but as a kid, like, you just learned. So it was fantastic. But I really believe that food defines us, not in the way you think, but it connects us to our roots, to our soul, and to our people. And so in today's discussion, in how to create an heirloom cookbook, there's two things operating at the same time, and that's like the importance of legacy and the notion of food and memory. What does legacy mean to you? Has anyone here thought about what your legacy is and will be? I'm just going to say that I think legacy transcends stuff, right? Like it's what's left of our essence after you're gone. It's what you're remembered for. And, legacy is the fabric of your being. It's who you are, where you came from, and it provides perspective and continuity for future generations. So you're all here today because I hope you're thinking about how food and memories and recipes are perhaps one of your legacies, right? So to chronicle the history of your family through the lens of recipes and food memories is a treasure and legacy for future generations. For me, it starts with my Nana. Her legacy lived on through my mom and now me. But things change, right? Life happens. I grew up in the 60s and 70s, very different from now. Fortunately, I have stepkids, so I was able to like have an impact on their food lives, and they all have their favorites. And whenever they come to visit, I know exactly what to make them. And then my husband ended up with celiac disease, so that's like super depressing to an Italian, right? Like, so I had to adapt everything, from to gluten free, but like nobody comes to our house and has a clue that that we're a gluten free household. My goal has been to preserve my Nana's and my mom's, and I guess my own legacy through the creation of an heirloom cookbook. And I'm just going to give you a quick look. Like this is what I created. It's my mom's maiden name is Lanzetta. So I thought because 99.999% of the recipes are from the Italian side, the other half of me is Czechoslovakian, that I couldn't just call it the Murko Heirloom Family Cookbook. I had to give a nod to where to the Italian side. But there's a really, really amazing adventure we can take by looking back and connecting to our who we are and where we came from by collecting our histories and awakening ourselves to our ancestors and those who came before you, not just in the recipes, not just in the stories, not just in the researching, digging, but it's a true activation and calling in of who they really were, their spirits and their personalities. So, and what I mean by that is even in something as simple as looking at recipes, you'll know if your grandmother was a neat cook or a messy cook, right? Or a total creative with clippings stuffed into plastic bags, or somebody who took pride in bending corners and keeping neat notes and cataloging everything. And I wanted to show you, like, so this is my mom. She's 88 and doing well. She had decided to collect, and she carefully wrote down all of the recipes in her handwriting over the years, and then you could see there's all these other things stuffed inside. This was her original, and then she made like a few more copies. Can you imagine, like, painstakingly writing each one of these? And then she kept one for herself, gave one to me, and gave one to my sister. So she, I would say, is one of a very organized and super neat cook. Anyway, so, but my grandmother, on the other hand, I kid you not, like, when she passed away and my mom, went down to Florida and brought all of her stuff back up, and I was like so excited to get my hands on Nana's recipes. They were stuffed in plastic bags. They were they were a mess. Then I realized, probably most of her recipes were right here, right? Like, it didn't matter how they were chronicled because Nana just, she knew how to just produce the food. So, so we get to connect, into the essence and spirit of the people, our ancestors, by looking back in history and experiencing and playing with recipes ourselves. It isn't just that food is the great connector, but it's how we are fed and how we cook that reveals a deeper part about how we experience our lives and the world. So, from my perspective, food forms an emotional narrative of our lives.
And Monica shared that her mother died of pancreatic cancer when she was 52. She's now 52 and a September 11th survivor. So looking into how to better document multi-generational recipes sooner than later, spent the last 2 weeks of her mom's life in crash course of all things cooking. And I just think that speaks to the importance of food and family and honoring those before us. That was...
Oh, Lindsay, and Monica, thank you. Sorry, you almost made me cry. Well, it's this project is powerful, in that it is, food is like a tremendous connector and so important to who we are. I'll read something from, I think, one of the most famous pieces that really connects food and memory. And it's from, I'm guessing because we're all Smithies, we probably are very familiar with this Marcel Proust quote. No sooner than the warm liquid mixed with the crumbs touched my palate, than a shudder ran through me and I stopped, intent upon the extraordinary thing that was happening to me. An exquisite pleasure had invaded my senses, something isolated, detached with no suggestion of its origin, and at once the vicissitudes of life had become indifferent to me, its disasters innocuous, its brevity illusory. The new sensation having had on me the effect which love has on filling me with a precious essence, or rather this essence was not in me, it was me. Whence did it come? What did it mean? How could I seize and apprehend it? And suddenly, the memory revealed itself. The taste was that of the little piece of Madeleine that on Sunday mornings at Cambrai, because Of those mornings, I did not go out before Mass. When I went to say good morning to her in her bedroom, my Aunt Leonie used to give me, dipping it first in her own cup of tea. The sight of the little Madeleine had recalled nothing to my mind before I tasted it, and all from my cup of tea. You just don't know what's going to trigger you, right? You don't know where, how where a memory is going to flood back from, and how, our taste memory, provides like time travel sometimes, right? It's just a phenomenal thing. um and what about smell, right? A particular dish, or an heirloom. And one of the, I wanted to show you guys this. Like, now my grandmother, this is a newer bag, but like through my life there was a plastic bag that disintegrated. It was completely yellow, and twice a year she would make manicotti crepes, and she would store it in a plastic bag. She would wrap it in paper towels, and this is her pan. It's, I know, it's, sorry, it's got to be like 100 plus years old at this point. And then, but inside she also stored this, which went along with the pan. And so you might wonder, what on earth is a clothespin doing on this? Well, my grandmother was one clever lady. And you know how when you're making any kind of batter, what happens? Like, this slips right into the bowl, right? And it gets all dirty and all like slimy. So this prevented the ladle from slipping into the pan, and made it a lot easier for her to make her crepes. And but that's like an item, right? So I see this, take it out when I want to make crepes, and I think of my grandmother and her ingenuity. And it's just such a great thing. So you just don't know what's going to trigger, a memory that transports you, back to a place, and where you can have those like really amazing thoughts. For me, I really like the two like smells. And this is something like, you ever just like walk by a restaurant, like, and if I smell like garlic and onions, it's like, okay, that was like the start of almost everything in our kitchen. And then and I have this thing for sizzling sound of pan fried chicken cutlets, right? Like, so if I just hear some sizzling, I'm like, I can, all of a sudden, I'm just like, okay, I wish somebody would make me some chicken cutlets. By the way, I made them for myself last night for dinner, just to get in the mood for this presentation, because those are kind of my comfort food. And I'll read you a little something later about that. So food forms a powerful part of our emotional narrative in our lives. And so do items. And when I produced my two PBS television specials, I had a Brazilian woman who had just actually become a citizen, and she had an army issued fork. And it was, certainly not special, but but she brought it back from Brazil to the United States, and it was her grandmother's. And that fork, represented, everything about her grandmother. And it just really touches my heart. And then I had this other woman, Elle Green, and she was a baker, and she had her grandmother's sifter. So there's just so many amazing visceral connections we have to items from the kitchen, and smells. And also, I think that many immigrants cling to their food traditions mostly because they want to preserve a link to where they came from, right? I mean, we all want to know like what our roots are, like who we are. So memory provides factual recall and the creation of and maintenance of emotional links to the past. And I found this quote from Kierkegaard, which I thought was pretty great. Recollection wants to maintain for the person the eternal continuity in life, and assure him that his earthly exist remains una tenore, or uninterrupted, or as of one breath, which I thought was just, beautiful, and totally relates to what we're talking about here. And then there's this really great book called The Omnivorous Mind by John Allen. And he writes, the taste, smell, and texture of food can trigger memories, not just of eating food itself, but also of place and setting. Food can prompt deeper memories of feelings and emotions, internal stakes of the mind and body. So there is no doubt in my mind that the smell of your grandmother's kitchen reassures you that life is one with the child who ate and played there. If it's a good memory, then it provides a delightful feeling of emotional continuity with the past. So it's really, great that other people care about this and have written about it. And we've talked about legacy and its importance. And we've talked about food memory. I'm hoping that you all spent a little time with a little writing prompt that went out in the reminder, which is like what your best food memories from Smith were. But before we get there, what I wanted to do was just read a couple of other, because I think, I want to give you a taste of what the Heirloom Meals Recipe Project is all about. And, to put together this legacy, this treasure, right, of like your stories, your photos, your recipes. I always find it great to seek inspiration from other writers. I have a really great list of food memoirs that I love that have inspired me, and I just want to read a couple of quotes from them. So I think most of you probably know who Frank Bruni is. He's mostly a New York Times political correspondent, but he's also a big foodie, and I think he may have spent a year as the food editor, maybe after Ruth Reichel. I can't remember, but anyway, he wrote this great memoir called Born Round, and here's his a quote that I pulled from his book. And the reason why I absolutely love this is, I grew up in Westchester County. He grew up in Westchester. We're probably about the same age. And he was chubby as a kid, and so was I. So like, I feel like he was like my brother from a different mother. So I remember almost everything from my childhood, he writes, in terms of food. In terms of favorite foods, to be more accurate, or even favorite parts of favorite foods. At age 6, homemade chocolate sauce over Breyer's vanilla ice cream. Mom used squares of semi-sweet chocolate along with butter and milk. And as the chocolate melted in a saucepan in the galley kitchen, it perfumed the entire floor of our Cape Cod on Manitou Drive in northern White Plains, a 45-minute ride from Manhattan, where Dad worked. Mom made chocolate sauce every Sunday night as a special weekend treat, and Mark and Harry and I got to eat our bowls of ice cream, 3 scoops each, and chocolate sauce in front of the TV set while watching Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. Sundays were for Sundays and lion kills in the Serengeti. I always volunteered to carry the empty bowls back into the kitchen because Mark and Harry were never entirely empty. There was always some neglected sauce hardening, like fudge, at the bottom. I would sweep it up with a finger en route to the dishwasher. Now, is that not like just like great food writing, right? It's like he captured everything. He captured not only the food, but then he knew everything about him, right? You knew like where he lived, his galley kitchen. He didn't have to tell you what decade it was. I mean, it's Mutual of Omaha, really great piece of food writing. And then there's I think probably a lot of you are familiar with the French Women's series by Mireille Gerlano. So this is a quote from French Women for All Seasons. Spring is full of harbingers, but none is more evocative of summer than the first great strawberries at market in late May or early June. As a child, I like to think that my father had planted the rows and rows of them in our garden with special affection, knowing them to be my favorite fruit. The ground around the plants was covered with straw so that each precious berry, after soaking up the vast amount of sunshine that needed to ripen it, had its own cradle in which to fall, and therefore would need little or no washing. Another just really, really beautiful piece of food writing. And not to say that anybody has to write like that for their heirloom cookbook, but when you start, reading, memoirs like this, or if you, were to do the Heirloom Meals program, um, these are the things that, I've curated to, help really tap into that source in us, right? That place where we store those memories. And because I think sometimes a blank piece of paper scares people, that when you have, some of these like things, you're like, oh yeah. And like that Frank Bruni, like, hey, that was totally our house, Mutual of Omaha. We were there. Like we probably weren't eating ice cream with chocolate sauce, but we were probably eating something else. And I was definitely that, like, I'll take, my brother would take forever to eat his ice cream and be like, I would eat mine in like 2 seconds and I'd be like, can I have some? Like, anyway, so that's like his writing just, kind of prompted that memory for me. So I'd like to now open it up and see if anybody thought about their best food memories from Smith.
When I was at Smith in the 60s, favorite dessert was Beethoven. Basically, it's kind of a cross between chocolate pudding and brownies.
A note in the chat that said that Beethoven dessert is still there in 2019 called brownie pudding on the menus.
The final analysis, it was really the beautiful conversations and the connections, right, that we had. And one of them was like how we would just, for Sunday brunch, I mean, at least in the early 80s, like the big thing was the flannel Lance nightgowns. And like we would just come down and just read the New York Times and just like for hours just sit there and drink coffee and then some of our friends would have their guy friends. It's like it was just, but that to me like is just like what I hold in my heart, just the essence of that opportunity to be together in those dining rooms at that time, Friday afternoon teas, beautiful like slice in all of our lives. Mostly though, I think it was probably less about the food and more about how we connected around it.
We have a family Thanksgiving every year, 80 to 100 people. Over the years, Aunt so-and-so's always brought her dish number one, dish number two. Uncle Pete has always got this. And so people have brought, so I'm trying to collect recipes. I wasn't thinking of writing a narrative just so much as coming up with a collection, but I can't get them to respond. I've got 2 recipes. So what I was hoping for is perhaps some guidance into how to prod people to write their recipes.
Well, I think that it's tenacity for one, and also I really think you have to almost use the fear tactic, right? But because like if you don't get it, like it could disappear, right? And
Yeah.
life is, look at how life changed so dramatically, like from January 2020 to February 2020, right? It's like we don't know what's ahead of us. So I don't really like the concept of fear, but I think it's the get around to it thing, years go by. And so I really think if you could just just say, look, like we're just so fortunate that we've had this, but like I don't want to lose it,
Yeah.
and press that issue with them that this is preserving this amazing thing that we've done in our family for years and years, and we all want this. Like it's not just you. Interviewing family members, asking them to send you recipes, some photos, and then there's some really great publishing tools out there. I mean, Shutterfly is one of them. I use Blurb. Blurb is great. They have all kinds of templates. I've really created a program that's deeper, right? That's really about connecting to love. I mean, I think that, what I've always said is that I think love will save the world. I believe food is love. I think food is, we do it every day. Why not love it, right? Why not love, what we cook, what we eat, who we cook for, who feeds us, and then find a way to share that and you know, pay it forward. In the back of my book, I mean, I had this one, my mom was in tears. I wrote a final word. The journey of putting this book together was emotional and healing. It allowed me to connect with my roots and value my life as seen through the lens of memory and food, to touch and feel the pages with Nana's and Mom's writing, and to put together our story through recipes and photos is an unparalleled gift that I can share with my loved ones and for posterity. I hope this book connects you to our past and brings a smile and reminds you how lucky we are to have such love. We have all lived rich, beautiful lives with food as our great connector. For those not yet born, I hope I have given you a window to the past, one that inspires you and informs you to live, cook, eat, share, and love. After all, life is really about moments, not stuff. And then Percentani, Cindon, that's like for 100 years. That means good luck in Italian. So however you choose to put together an heirloom family cookbook, start. Just start. And start with like writing, what are your favorites, get them written down, write the head notes. And the head notes, if you get cookbooks, all cookbooks, they have a little 5 sentences or what it's about. You could even just use the head notes as the story, so you don't have to write a tome. And then go to Shutterfly, Blurb, or any other of these publishing apps that are now all over the internet, and upload them, and get them published and give them for gifts. And
Carole's introduction to this is a great inspiration if you want to pursue this on your own. I can say that I personally, when I started this project, my mom was 90 years old. She will be 95 years old in a couple of weeks. We've had a lot of conversations about this book and really producing it. And I want to produce it so she can see it. But the process of reflecting on your childhood, your grandparent, your grandmothers, your grandfathers, what they did, those are all these very rich memories. And no matter how you pursue this, it certainly is an awesome opportunity to do this deep dive into your own memory bank and what these both food and family memories mean, and how we expand our family as we go out into the world on our own, friends who we consider family. Those are all part of our journey and part of this feeling of love in the world that we share across the table.
I've started that several times. I have copies of, stained recipes, etc., in my mother's handwriting, and just, procrastinated. And there they sit. And I've never. So this sounds wonderful. And your closing remarks in your book were just beautiful.
Thank you.
Has anybody ever done after you do the history, the context, the old recipes, etc., sort of a bringing it up to our modern sensibilities? And I mean, my mother, my mother-in-law, my grandmother, they were all kind of rotund. I have recently lost 91 pounds on purpose. I have no desire to perpetuate obesity in my offspring. So has anybody sort of created a section where they update the recipes to be more healthy?
I did in mine. I did.
Good idea to me. I would like to do that.
I would, if I were you, I'd do your story and then I'd do the healthy recipe. And then in a little sidebar, I'd put it used to have, a pound of butter, this, that, and the other thing. Don't honor it you can honor it in the head note even, but you could, if you want the legacy to be you created this, this whole new set of recipes to be healthy, but honoring your, the essence of of what you grew up with. I think then maybe use the head notes to describe what it was, right? And then the new creation. So yes, I would totally, honor you and doing it that way, but doesn't mean that the stories don't have to be there, right? And the stained recipe cards and I've left like blank pages in the back of my book so I can actually even write in new healthy recipes. I think it's important to honor our past, but I said it's also the bridge to our future. So thank you, and thank you for attending, and thank you for listening to me. Thank you. Bye. Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.